I started paying attention to something unusual a few years ago. People who stopped chasing purchases began living differently, not smaller lives, but somehow fuller ones. At first, it seemed contradictory. We're taught that spending equals living well, that comfort requires constant buying. But the patterns I observed told a different story entirely. Older adults who stepped away from automatic spending discovered transformations they never expected. Some were practical, like finally having money in savings. Others were deeply personal, like relationships that grew stronger without gifts or expensive outings. If you're curious about what happens when spending stops being the default answer to everything, this channel explores these quiet transformations every week. Subscribe so clarity like this keeps showing up in your life. I'm really glad you're here. Let's begin. Today, you'll discover 15 surprising shifts that happen when older adults step away from constant spending. Some are practical, others are deeply personal, and a few will completely change how money feels. The final revelation often surprises people the most, so stay until the end. Finding 1. Financial anxiety disappeared first. Within just weeks of stopping unnecessary spending, something unexpected happened for most people. The worry about money didn't grow. It vanished. This seems backwards at first. We assume cutting back means feeling deprived, anxious about what we're missing. But the opposite occurred. Without purchases to track, justify, or regret, minds became quieter. There were no more credit card statements that caused panic, no more mental gymnastics trying to remember which bills were due or which purchases needed to be returned. The constant background hum of financial stress simply faded. One woman in her 60s described it as finally being able to breathe in her own home. She wasn't making more money. Her income hadn't changed. But without the pressure of spending, every dollar she had felt like enough. Her bank account stopped being a source of dread and became something neutral, even reassuring. This shift happened faster than anyone expected. Within a month, most people reported feeling lighter, like a weight had been removed they didn't realize they were carrying. The irony is profound. Spending less created the financial peace that spending more never delivered. And this was just the beginning. The changes that followed were even more surprising. Finding 2. Time expanded in strange ways. When shopping stopped filling weekends, something remarkable appeared. Time. Not empty time, but available time. Hours that seemed lost before suddenly existed again. People began noticing how much energy shopping actually consumed. The driving to stores, browsing aisles, comparing prices, making decisions, carrying bags, organizing purchases, returning items that didn't work. All of it took more time than anyone realized while they were doing it. One man in his 70s kept a simple log. He discovered he was spending nearly 15 hours per week on shopping-related activities: groceries, home goods, clothes, gifts, random errands. When he cut unnecessary trips, those 15 hours didn't disappear. They transformed into something else entirely. He started walking every morning, he called old friends, he fixed things around the house he'd been meaning to get to for years. His wife noticed the difference immediately. He seemed more present, less distracted. They started eating dinner together without rushing. They watched sunsets from their porch. Small moments that had been crowded out by busyness returned. This time expansion wasn't about doing more. It was about being more available for what actually mattered. Days felt longer but not overwhelming. There was space to breathe, to think, to simply exist without a to-do list. Time became a gift again, not a commodity to be spent. Finding 3. Homes felt calmer almost immediately. Less coming in meant less to organize, maintain, or think about. Rooms exhaled. Mornings felt simpler. This wasn't about minimalism or living with nothing. It was about stopping the constant influx that required attention. Every purchase creates invisible work. It needs to be unpacked, stored, cleaned, moved, remembered, eventually disposed of. When that cycle slowed, homes became easier to manage. Counters stayed clear longer. Closets had breathing room. There wasn't a constant search for space to put new things. One couple in their late 60s described their home as finally feeling finished. Not decorated perfectly, just complete. They stopped looking at rooms thinking about what needed to be added or upgraded. Their furniture was fine. Their kitchen worked. Their bedroom felt comfortable. Without the urge to improve through purchasing, they began appreciating what already existed. Maintenance became simpler too. Fewer things meant fewer things breaking, needing batteries, requiring updates or repairs. The mental load of home ownership lightened significantly. They weren't managing stuff anymore, they were just living. Guests noticed the difference. The home felt peaceful, uncluttered in a way that wasn't stark or empty, just calm. This calmness spread into other areas. When the physical environment settled, minds did too. Sleep improved, morning routines became smoother, the home stopped demanding attention and started providing rest. Finding 4. Relationships deepened without effort. Without gifts or outings to plan, conversations became the main currency. Connection grew stronger, not weaker. This surprised people most. We're taught that relationships require spending. Dinners out, birthday presents, holiday shopping, planned activities. But when those expectations faded, something more genuine emerged. Phone calls lasted longer. Visits became about presence, not presence. Friends started showing up with homemade food instead of store-bought gifts. Time together felt richer because it wasn't structured around consuming something. One woman stopped buying gifts for her grandchildren's birthdays and started writing them letters instead. Letters about their personalities, their growth, memories they'd shared. She worried at first that they'd be disappointed, but years later, those letters were what they treasured most. They kept them in special boxes. The purchased toys were long forgotten. Her relationship with them grew deeper through words, not things. Friendships shifted too. Without shopping trips as the default activity, people started walking together, cooking together, working on projects side by side. Conversations during these activities went places they never had before. Vulnerability increased. Real struggles got shared. Support became practical, not theoretical. Marriages grew stronger when dates stopped requiring reservations and started being as simple as coffee on the porch. The pressure to perform or impress faded. What remained was genuine companionship. People felt seen, not entertained, and that made all the difference. Finding 5. Old hobbies reappeared. Things set aside until later suddenly had room again. Books, tools, projects. They were waiting all along. When spending stopped filling time and attention, space opened for activities that once brought joy but had been crowded out. One man rediscovered his woodworking tools in the garage. They'd been sitting unused for a decade, buried under boxes of purchases that seemed urgent at the time. He started small, fixing a wobbly chair, then building a bookshelf. Within months, he was crafting furniture for family members. The satisfaction was immense, not just from creating, but from using skills that had atrophied. He remembered why he loved working with his hands. A woman in her mid-60s pulled out her sewing machine. She'd bought fabric years ago with intentions to make quilts, but never found time. Now, with shopping no longer consuming her weekends, she spent Sunday afternoons stitching. Each quilt told a story. Each stitch felt meditative. She gave them to family members, who cherished them in ways store-bought blankets never would have been. Gardening returned, painting, writing, playing instruments, reading. These weren't new hobbies requiring expensive equipment or lessons. They were dormant passions that needed permission to exist again. The shift wasn't about finding time, it was about reclaiming it. When consumption stopped being the default leisure activity, creativity and skill building naturally filled the space. People felt more themselves, more capable, more engaged with life. Finding 6. Self-worth separated from spending. A quiet realization emerged. Value didn't come from what was owned. This shift changed everything. For decades, identity and worth had been subtly tied to possessions. The car in the driveway, the clothes in the closet, the home's appearance, the gifts given, these things signaled success, care, status. But when spending stopped, something unexpected happened. Self-worth didn't collapse, it stabilized. People began defining themselves by who they were, not what they owned. One man described feeling lighter after selling his expensive car and buying a reliable used one. He'd been maintaining payments that stressed him constantly. The car had represented success, but it had also represented debt and worry. The used car got him where he needed to go just as well. And suddenly, he wasn't his vehicle. He was himself. A woman stopped buying designer clothes and started wearing what she already had. At first, she worried about being judged, but she quickly realized no one noticed or cared. Her friendships didn't change. Her worth at work didn't diminish. She was still competent, kind, funny, herself. The clothes had never been the point. This separation was liberating. Without possessions defining identity, there was freedom to simply be. Achievements became personal, not material. Happiness came from relationships, health, purpose, not from acquiring. This internal shift rippled outward. Confidence grew because it was rooted in something real. Worth became inherent, not purchased. And that foundation was unshakable. Finding 7, comparison stopped hurting. When the race to keep up ended, other people's choices stopped mattering. Freedom arrived in that space. Social comparison is exhausting. Someone always has something newer, bigger, better. The neighbor's renovated kitchen, the friend's vacation photos, the relative's upgraded car. These comparisons create a constant sense of falling behind. But when spending stopped being the metric, the comparisons lost their sting. One couple stopped scrolling through social media, looking at other people's homes and renovations. They realized every photo triggered a subtle dissatisfaction with their own space. When they stopped looking, their home felt perfectly adequate again. It was clean, comfortable, functional. That was enough. They stopped measuring their life against curated highlights. Another woman noticed she felt happier at family gatherings once she stopped trying to match everyone's gift-giving. She couldn't afford what her siblings could, and it had created quiet shame. When she opted out entirely and started giving time instead, a burden lifted. She helped with childcare. She organized photos. She cooked meals. Her contributions were valued differently, but just as deeply. The comparison trap dissolved when the game ended. Other people could spend however they wanted. It no longer reflected on personal worth or success. This detachment wasn't bitterness or resentment. It was genuine indifference born from contentment. When life felt full without spending, what others did became irrelevant. Peace replaced envy, and that peace was profound. Finding 8. Gratitude became automatic. What was already present began standing out. Working appliances, comfortable shoes, familiar routines, enough became obvious. Without the constant search for something new or better, people started noticing what they already had. Gratitude stopped being an intentional practice and became a natural response. One man described looking at his old coffee maker differently. Instead of seeing something outdated that needed replacing, he appreciated that it still worked. Every morning, it made coffee. Reliably. For years. That was remarkable. His microwave, his vacuum, his reading lamp, all still functional, all quietly serving him without asking for anything in return. A woman started feeling grateful for her paid-off car. It wasn't new or flashy, but it ran well. No monthly payment, no debt, just transportation whenever she needed it. That freedom felt more valuable than any upgraded model. Gratitude extended beyond objects. People appreciated their health in new ways. The ability to walk, to see, to hear. Bodies that still functioned despite aging. Relationships that had endured. Homes that provided shelter. Simple meals that satisfied. These things had always existed but had been overshadowed by what was lacking. When the focus shifted from scarcity to sufficiency, abundance appeared everywhere. Life wasn't missing anything essential. It was already full. This perspective transformed daily experience. Instead of moving through days noticing what needed fixing or upgrading, people moved through noticing what worked. That shift in attention created lasting contentment. Finding 9. Creativity replaced consumption. Instead of buying solutions, people began making them. Gardens, repairs, meals from scratch, capability returned. When spending stopped being the first answer to problems, creativity emerged. Broken items got fixed instead of replaced. Empty spaces got filled with projects instead of purchases. Skills that had atrophied were dusted off and used again. One woman started cooking entirely from scratch instead of buying prepared meals. At first, it was purely financial, but quickly it became something else. She experimented with flavors. She adapted recipes. She learned techniques she'd never tried before. Her meals became better than anything she'd bought, and the process itself was satisfying in ways shopping never had been. A man started repairing his own clothes instead of discarding them. He learned to sew buttons, patch holes, fix hems. His clothes lasted years longer. He felt competent and resourceful. These weren't survival skills born from desperation. They were creative expressions born from choice. People started growing vegetables, even in small spaces. They made gifts instead of buying them. They found free entertainment through libraries, community events, nature. They solved problems with imagination rather than credit cards. This creativity built confidence. Each successful project proved capability. Each meal cooked, item repaired, solution found reinforced a truth that had been forgotten. They were resourceful. They were skilled. They didn't need constant purchasing to live well. And that realization was empowering in ways that shopping never could be. Finding 10. Energy returned for what actually mattered. Without shopping returns and decision fatigue, mental space opened for relationships, health, and rest. Priorities realigned naturally. Every purchase requires energy. Not just the act of buying, but the mental work before and after. Researching options, comparing prices, deciding, second-guessing, organizing, maintaining, eventually discarding. This cycle consumes more energy than most people realize. When it stopped, that energy redirected itself automatically. People had bandwidth for things they'd been too exhausted to address. One woman finally scheduled the doctor's appointment she'd been postponing. She started walking daily. She called her sister more often. None of this was planned. She simply had the mental space to care for what mattered. A man started reading again. Books he'd bought years ago finally got opened. He read before bed instead of scrolling through shopping apps. His sleep improved. His mind felt sharper. Another couple started volunteering. They'd always wanted to, but claimed they didn't have time. When shopping stopped consuming weekends, time appeared. They found a local food bank and started helping weekly. The work was meaningful. It connected them to their community in ways consumption never had. Energy that had been scattered across dozens of small purchasing decisions became focused on a few important priorities: health, connection, purpose, rest. These foundations of well-being, which had been neglected during busier times, received attention again. And life improved measurably, not through addition, but through redirection. Finding 11. Generosity grew, not shrank. With less going out thoughtlessly, more became available for thoughtful giving. Time, attention, genuine help. These mattered more than gifts ever did. The assumption is that spending less means giving less. But the opposite happened. Without money disappearing into unnecessary purchases, people had resources available for meaningful generosity, and they discovered that the most valuable gifts weren't purchased at all. One man started helping his elderly neighbor with yard work, just showing up on Saturday mornings with his tools. No payment, no expectation, just presence. The neighbor had been struggling alone for years. This help was life-changing. It couldn't have been bought at any price. A woman started watching her daughter's children one afternoon a week. Free childcare. Her daughter had been stretched thin financially and emotionally. That single afternoon each week gave her space to breathe, to run errands without kids in tow, to rest. It was the most valuable gift she'd ever received. Cash donations to causes that mattered increased too. Without frivolous spending draining accounts, people had money available for intentional giving. They supported local organizations, helped family members facing hardship, contributed to community needs. The giving felt different. It was chosen, not obligatory. It came from surplus, not scarcity. And it created connections that purchases never could. Recipients felt genuinely helped, not just gifted. Givers felt purposeful, not performative. Generosity became about impact, not appearance. And that made it deeply satisfying for everyone involved. Finding 12. Purpose became clearer. When days weren't organized around acquiring, life's actual direction appeared. What mattered became unmistakable. Constant consumption obscures purpose. When time, energy, and attention are spent chasing purchases, deeper questions get avoided. What am I actually working toward? What kind of life do I want? What legacy matters? These questions require stillness to answer. When spending stopped, stillness arrived. One man realized he'd been shopping out of boredom and avoidance, coming home from work, wandering stores, browsing online. It filled time but not meaning. When he stopped, the emptiness became obvious, but instead of being terrifying, it was clarifying. He needed purpose. He started volunteering with a mentorship program, helping younger people navigate careers. That felt meaningful. His evenings had direction again, not just distraction. A woman recognized that her shopping had been trying to fill a void left by retirement. Without work defining her days, she'd been lost. Purchases gave her something to do, something to care about. But it wasn't working. When she stopped, she faced the real question. What did she want this chapter of life to be about? She started writing memoir-style stories for her grandchildren, preserving family history. It gave her days structure and significance. Purpose can't be purchased. It has to be discovered. And discovery requires space. When consumption stopped crowding every hour, people found space to ask hard questions. The answers varied, but the process was universal. Life gained direction. Days gained meaning. And that clarity was worth more than anything money could buy. Finding 13, physical health improved. Less stress, more movement, home-cooked meals. These weren't planned, they were side effects. Bodies responded. The health improvements weren't from expensive gym memberships or supplements. They came naturally from lifestyle changes that accompanied reduced spending. Financial stress decreased, which lowered blood pressure and improved sleep. Shopping trips were replaced with walks, which increased daily movement. Prepared foods gave way to home cooking, which improved nutrition. One woman lost weight without trying. She'd been eating out frequently because it was convenient. When she started cooking at home to save money, portion sizes naturally decreased. Ingredients were fresher. She felt better. Within months, her energy increased. Her doctor noticed the difference in her blood work. A man's chronic stress-related headaches diminished. He'd been carrying financial anxiety for years. When spending stopped and savings grew, his body relaxed. The headaches, which he'd assumed were permanent, faded. He slept better. He woke up feeling rested for the first time in years. Movement increased organically. Without shopping as entertainment, people walked more, gardened more, spent time outdoors. They weren't exercising intentionally. They were simply living more actively. Blood pressure improved. Joint pain decreased. Mental clarity sharpened. These health improvements reinforced the lifestyle changes. Feeling better physically made it easier to continue spending less. A positive cycle emerged. Less spending led to less stress. Less stress led to better health. Better health led to more energy for meaningful activities. The body kept score, and it rewarded the changes with vitality. Finding 14, confidence in handling less grew stronger each month without unnecessary spending built proof. Life remained full. Security came from within, not from accumulation. At first, cutting spending felt like an experiment, a temporary challenge. But as months passed, something shifted. Confidence grew. People proved to themselves they could live well with less. And that proof was powerful. One couple worried initially about social isolation. Would they lose friends without dinners out and planned activities? But their relationships didn't fade. They adjusted. Friends came over for potlucks instead of restaurants. Gatherings became more frequent, more relaxed. They weren't missing out. They were connecting more deeply. A man doubted his ability to stay content without retail therapy. Shopping had been his stress relief for years, but as he found other outlets like walking, reading, building things with his hands, he realized the shopping had never actually helped. It was a temporary distraction that created more stress through spending. Real relief came from addressing stress directly, not masking it with purchases. Each successful month built on the previous one. Initial uncertainty gave way to assurance. People stopped questioning whether they could maintain the lifestyle. They knew they could because they already were. This confidence extended beyond spending. It became a general sense of capability. If they could change their relationship with money after decades of habits, what else could they change? The possibilities expanded, self-trust deepened, and that foundation of confidence supported every other area of life. They weren't victims of circumstance. They were capable of choosing differently, and that power was life-changing. Finding 15. Legacy shifted from things to wisdom. What became worth passing on wasn't possessions, it was patterns, choices, ways of living. This realization often arrives last, but it transforms everything. In the beginning, older adults worry about leaving inheritance, money, property, valuables. These feel like measures of a life well lived. But after living with less spending, priorities shifted. What mattered wasn't what could be left behind, but what could be taught. One grandfather stopped worrying about the size of inheritance he'd leave. Instead, he focused on teaching his grandchildren how to live within their means. He showed them how to budget, how to save, how to distinguish between needs and wants. These lessons would serve them far longer than any sum of money. A grandmother realized her children didn't want her things. They wanted her stories, her perspective, her time. She started recording voice memos, sharing family history, life lessons, things she'd learned the hard way. Those recordings became treasures her family returned to long after she was gone. The shift from accumulation to wisdom felt like the final piece. Everything else, the reduced anxiety, the deeper relationships, the clarity of purpose, it all led here, to understanding that a life's value isn't measured by what's accumulated, but by what's shared. Wisdom, love, presence, these can't be inventoried or distributed through a will, but they're what actually endure. And recognizing that transformed how people spent their remaining years. Less focused on building estates, more focused on building connections. That became the ultimate gift. If you paused spending for 1 month, which of these shifts would matter most to you? Would it be the financial peace, the return of time, the deepening of relationships? There's no need to change immediately. Simply noticing the possibility is meaningful. These 15 transformations didn't happen because people were forced into scarcity. They happened because people chose intentionally to step away from automatic spending. And what they discovered was life becoming fuller, not smaller. If any of this feels familiar, if you've noticed the weight of constant consumption, or wondered whether there's a different way to live, share your thoughts in the comments. Many others are quietly reconsidering their relationship with money too. You're not alone in this, and sometimes reading that someone else understands makes the first step easier. What's one thing you're curious about trying? One small change that might create space for something better? There's no wrong answer, just the beginning of awareness, and that's exactly where transformation starts. Not with perfection, but with noticing, with questioning, with imagining a life organized differently. At this stage of life, money should serve living, not define it. What began as an experiment in spending less often becomes a blueprint for living better. If this perspective brought clarity or made you see your own spending differently, subscribe to Simple Years. Every week, practical wisdom like this arrives. Ideas about simplifying homes, strengthening relationships, finding peace in daily routines. This channel exists for people who want less chaos and more direction. Subscribing means you won't have to search for clarity anymore. It simply shows up. And there's something comforting about that. Knowing that every week, there's a reminder that life can be calmer, fuller, more intentional. The next video explores what happens when older adults simplify their homes. The transformations are just as surprising. You won't want to miss it. Until then, consider this. Every dollar not spent is a choice reclaimed. Every choice reclaimed is a life more fully lived. Thank you for being here.